The Duke of Ashbourne was known for two things: his immense ungodly wealth and a heart so frozen that even the London fires couldn't thaw it. They said he hadn't smiled since the accident, the night the carriage overturned and took everything from him. He spent his days in the shadowed corners of his vast garden, a ghost in his own life. But the walls he built to keep the world out were about to be shattered by the smallest of intruders. It wasn't a debutante seeking a title or a banker seeking a loan. It was a 5-year-old boy with dirt on his knees who looked at the most terrifying man in England and made an offer that would change history. "Don't cry, sir," the boy whispered, wiping a tear from the Duke's scarred cheek. "You look lonely. You can have my mama." London, 1889. The fog clinging to the iron gates of Blackwood Hall was thick enough to choke on, but it was nothing compared to the suffocating silence inside the manor. Sebastian Blackwood. The 9th Duke of Ashbourne sat in his library. The fire had burned down to embers, casting long skeletal shadows against the mahogany shelves. In his hand, he held a glass of amber whiskey that he hadn't taken a sip from in an hour. He was staring at the portrait above the mantel, a painting of a laughing woman and a baby. He had ordered the drapes drawn over it 3 years ago, yet tonight the fabric was pulled back. It was the anniversary. "Your Grace." The voice came from the doorway. It was deeply hesitant. Sebastian didn't turn. He knew it was waiting for him. The world always waited for him, hungry for his money and terrified of his temper. "I told you I was not to be disturbed. Distinctive orders, Barnaby." Sebastian growled, his voice rough, like gravel grinding under a boot heel. Barnaby, the aging butler who had served the Blackwoods since Sebastian was in short pants, stepped fully into the room. He wasn't intimidated. He was the only one left who remembered Sebastian before the darkness took him. "I am aware, sir, but Lady Genevieve is in the drawing room. She refuses to leave." Sebastian's hand tightened around the crystal glass until his knuckles turned white. "Genevieve, of course. She says it is urgent regarding the estate gala, sir, and she mentioned your uncle Lord Silas." At the mention of Silas, Sebastian finally turned. The scar that ran from his left temple down to his jawline, a jagged souvenir from the carriage crash that had killed his wife Alice and their infant son, flared red in the dim light. It was the mark that made society ladies gasp behind their fans. It was the mark of a beast. "Send her away," Sebastian said, standing up. He was a towering figure, broad-shouldered and imposing, but he carried himself with the weariness of a man walking underwater. "Tell her if she does not leave, I will have the footmen escort her out. I am in no mood for her scheming tonight." "She claims to have found a solution to the codicil, Your Grace," Barnaby said softly. Sebastian froze. The codicil. The final cruel joke his late father had written into the will. The Duke must produce an heir or remarry within 5 years of inheriting the title, or the unentailed assets, the shipping lines, the mines, the liquid cash that kept the estate afloat, would pass to his closest male relative. That relative was his uncle, Silas Blackwood, a gambler, a cheat, and a man who had already mortgaged his own soul to the London underbelly. If Silas got the money, the tenants of the Blackwood estate would be destitute within a year. The deadline was 3 months away. "She is persistent," Sebastian muttered, downing the whiskey in one burn. "Very well, but I will not meet her in the drawing room. I am going to the garden. If she wants to speak, she can brave the cold." He stormed out, bypassing the grand staircase, and heading for the French doors at the back of the house. He needed air. He needed the biting cold of the English winter to remind him he was still alive, even if he didn't want to be. Outside the garden was a labyrinth of frozen roses and skeletal oak trees. This had been Alice's sanctuary. Now it was a graveyard of memories. Sebastian walked until he reached the stone bench near the old fountain, which had been dry for years. He sat down, burying his face in his hands. The isolation was absolute. He was the richest man in the county, yet he had nothing. He was 32 years old and felt 80. "I can't do it, Alice," he whispered to the empty air. "I can't marry her. She has eyes like a viper. But if I don't, Silas wins." He let his guard down just for a second. A single hot tear escaped his squeezed-shut eyes, tracing the path of his scar. He hated himself for it. Dukes didn't cry. Monsters didn't cry. That was when he heard the crunch of dry leaves. It wasn't the heavy step of a footman, nor the clicking heels of Lady Genevieve. It was a light, scurrying sound. A rabbit. A fox. Sebastian looked up, wiping his face instantly, his expression hardening back into stone. Standing 5 feet away, peering out from behind a large frost-covered hedge, was a child. A boy. He couldn't have been more than 5 or 6. He was dressed in clothes that were clean but threadbare, a woolen coat that was slightly too large, patched at the elbows, and a flat cap pulled low over messy brown curls. His eyes were wide, the color of polished hazelnut, and they were fixed squarely on the Duke. Sebastian blinked. Children did not come here. The high walls kept the village out. "Who are you?" Sebastian demanded, though his voice lacked its usual thunder. He was too shocked. "How did you get in here?" The boy didn't run. He stepped out from the hedge, clutching a small, worn-out wooden soldier toy. He walked right up to the bench, showing a bravery that most grown men lacked in Sebastian's presence. The boy looked at the scar. Then he looked at Sebastian's damp eyes. "You're sad," the boy stated. It wasn't a question. It was a matter-of-fact observation. "I am the Duke of Ashbourne," Sebastian corrected, defaulting to his title as a shield. "And you are trespassing." "My name is Leo," the boy said, ignoring the title entirely. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a slightly squashed handkerchief. It was cheap cotton, embroidered with a small, crooked blue flower. "You shouldn't cry, sir. Mamma says crying makes your head hurt." Sebastian stared at the handkerchief. "I am not crying." "Yes, you are," Leo insisted. He stepped closer, right between the Duke's knees, and boldly reached up. He dabbed the cloth against Sebastian's cheek. Sebastian was paralyzed. He should have shouted. He should have called for Barnaby. But the boy smelled of soap and peppermint, a scent so innocent it made Sebastian's chest ache. "I don't have a papa," Leo said conversationally, as if they were old friends. "He went to heaven before I was born. But Mama says we have to be brave." Sebastian looked at the small boy. "He went to heaven before I was born." Just like Sebastian's son would have been now. "Why are you here, Leo?" Sebastian asked, his voice cracking. Leo looked around conspiratorially. "Mama is working. She's fixing the curtains in the big glass room. She told me to sit on the chair and not move, but I saw a squirrel." The conservatory, Sebastian realized. They had hired temporary seamstresses to repair the tapestries and drapes for the upcoming gala. The gala he didn't want to host. Leo looked back at Sebastian, studying the Duke's loneliness with a wisdom beyond his years. The boy seemed to come to a decision. He placed his small hand on Sebastian's giant gloved one. "Don't cry, sir," Leo said, his voice dropping to a loud whisper. "You look lonely. You can have my mama." Sebastian's eyebrows shot up. "I beg your pardon. You can have her." Leo nodded vigorously. "She's the best, mama. She sings songs and she makes soup. She's sad too sometimes. Maybe if you have her, you won't be sad. And she won't be sad. You can share." For the first time in 3 years, a strange sensation tugged at the corner of Sebastian's mouth. It wasn't quite a smile, but the ice was cracking. "You cannot simply give your mother away to strange men in gardens, Leo," Sebastian said, a hint of softness entering his tone. "You're not strange," Leo decided. "You're just broken, like my toy soldier." He held up the wooden toy which was missing a leg. "Mama fixes things. She can fix you." Before Sebastian could respond, a frantic female voice pierced the cold air. "Leo, Leo. Oh heavens, where are you?" The boy's eyes went wide. "Uh-oh. That's Mama." 30 minutes earlier, Clara Caldwell adjusted the heavy velvet drape, her fingers aching from the cold. The conservatory of Blackwood Hall was magnificent, a towering glass cathedral filled with exotic ferns and dormant vines. But it was freezing. "Just 2 more panels, Clara," she whispered to herself. "Just 2 more, and you'll have enough for the rent." She stepped down from the ladder, smoothing her grey dress. It was simple, devoid of the lace and frills the upper-class women wore, but it was meticulously neat. Clara was 26, with hair the colour of autumn wheat that she kept strictly pinned back, and eyes that held a perpetual shadow of worry. She checked the corner where she had left Leo. The chair was empty. Panic, cold and sharp, spiked in her chest. "Leo," she hissed, keeping her voice low. She couldn't afford to be caught. Mrs. Gable, the head housekeeper, had been strictly clear. "No children. The Duke tolerates no noise, no mess, and certainly no brats." But Clara had no choice. Her landlady, Mrs. Higgins, had raised the rent on their tiny attic room in Cheapside, and the neighbour who usually watched Leo was sick with the flu. If Clara didn't take this job at the hall, they would be on the street by Friday. So she had smuggled him in under a pile of linens in the laundry cart, promising him a sweet bun if he stayed still. "Leo," she called again, a little louder this time. She hurried through the conservatory, her heart hammering against her ribs. If the Duke saw him, rumours about the frozen Duke were whispered all over London. They said he was a tyrant. They said he fired a gardener once for humming too loudly. She pushed open the glass doors leading to the west garden. The fog was rolling in. "Leo, please," she prayed. "Don't be seen." She followed the small footprints in the frost. They led toward the old fountain. As she rounded the large hedge, she stopped dead. Her breath caught in her throat. There, sitting on a stone bench, was the Duke of Ashbourne. She recognized him from the newspapers. The dark coat, the imposing posture, and the scar that marred his face. He looked terrifying. And standing right between his knees, holding his hand, was Leo. Clara's blood ran cold. She rushed forward without thinking, abandoning all protocol. "Leo! Leo!" "Oh heavens, where are you?" she cried out, though she could clearly see him. She needed to break the moment before the Duke unleashed his wrath. Leo spun around. "Mama! Look, I found a friend." Clara reached them breathless and trembling. She grabbed Leo by the shoulders, pulling him back from the Duke as if the man were a roaring fire. She dropped into a curtsy so deep she almost fell into the snow. "Your Grace, I am so sorry," Clara stammered, keeping her head bowed. He didn't mean to intrude. He wandered off. It is entirely my fault. Please do not punish him. I will take him away immediately. We will leave. I will forfeit my pay." She was rambling, terrified. She grabbed Leo's hand and turned to flee. "Wait." The single word was spoken softly, but it carried the weight of absolute command. It stopped Clara in her tracks. She turned slowly, clutching Leo to her hip. "Your Grace." Sebastian stood up. Up close, he was even larger than she imagined. He towered over her. He looked at Clara. Really looked at her for the first time. He expected to see a common maid. But the woman before him had a dignity that the grey dress couldn't hide. Her face was pale from the cold, her lips trembling, but her eyes, blue as a summer sky, were fierce, with protective motherly instinct. She looked familiar. Sebastian narrowed his eyes. "You are the seamstress." "Yes, Your Grace." "Clara. Clara Caldwell." "Caldwell," Sebastian repeated. The name sparked a distant memory. Something unpleasant involving his solicitors years ago, but he couldn't place it. Why is this child in my garden? I had nowhere else to leave him. "Your Grace," Clara admitted, lifting her chin slightly. "I needed the work. I know it is against the rules. We will go." Sebastian looked from the terrified mother to the boy who had offered him her hand in marriage just moments ago. He looked at the handkerchief Leo had used to wipe his tear. "He told me I could have you," Sebastian said abruptly. Clara blinked her face, flushing crimson. "Excuse me." "He said I was lonely and that I could have his mama." Sebastian deadpanned, watching her reaction. Clara gasped, looking down at Leo in horror. "Leo? You didn't—" Leo shrugged innocently. "He was crying, Mama. You said we have to share with people who don't have anything." Clara looked back at the Duke, mortified. "Your Grace, he is a child. He speaks nonsense. Please forgive his impertinence." Sebastian looked at the woman. He should fire her. He should have them escorted out. That was what the Duke of Ashbourne would do. But then he remembered the empty house. He remembered Lady Genevieve waiting inside like a vulture. He remembered the silence. And he looked at Leo, who was looking at him with total trust. "You are not leaving," Sebastian said. Clara flinched. "Sir, please, I cannot go to prison. You are not going to prison, Mrs. Caldwell," Sebastian interrupted. He took a step closer. "You are going to help me. Help you. My uncle and a eager suitor are currently inside my home, plotting to dismantle my life. They believe I am a broken recluse incapable of human connection." Sebastian's eyes bored into hers. "I need to prove them wrong. I need to show them that I am moving on." He paused, a reckless, insane plan forming in his mind. It was the kind of plan born of desperation and whiskey. "You need money, Mrs. Caldwell." "Desperately, Your Grace," she whispered. "And I need a shield," Sebastian said. "I am hiring you, not as a seamstress, but as my guest." Clara stared at him. "Your guest, tonight at dinner," Sebastian said, his voice firming up. "You will dine with me. You and the boy. You will pretend to be an old acquaintance. Someone who brings me happiness." "Your Grace, this is madness," Clara said, stepping back. "I am a seamstress. I have no gown. I don't know how to dine with dukes. And Why would you do this? Sebastian looked down at Leo. Because your son was the first person in 3 years to touch me without asking for a check. He looked back at Clara. 1 night, £10. That is 6 months' wages for you. Clara's heart hammered. £10. That could pay the rent for a year. It could buy Leo new shoes, warm coats. She looked at the Duke. He was terrifying, yes. But she saw what Leo saw. Behind the scar and the ice, there was a man who was drowning. £20, Clara said, her voice shaking, but determined. Sebastian's lips quirked. A spark of life. 20, deal. But, Clara added, pulling Leo closer, if you shout at him or scare him, the deal is off. Duke or not. Sebastian Blackwood bowed his head slightly. Agreed. Good, Clara exhaled. Come then, Sebastian said, turning back toward the house. Let us go introduce my new friends to Lady Genevieve. This should be entertaining. As they walked back toward the towering manor, Leo tugged on Clara's hand. See, Mamma, Leo whispered, loud enough for the Duke to hear. I told you I'd fix him. The transition from the freezing garden to the grand foyer of Blackwood Hall was like stepping from a grave into a palace, though the palace felt just as dead. Barnaby the butler nearly dropped the silver tray he was polishing when the front doors opened. He stared, mouth agape, as the Duke strode in snow melting on his broad shoulders, followed by the seamstress and a small boy clutching a wooden soldier. Your Grace, Barnaby stammered, his eyes darting to the mud on Leo's boots. Barnaby, Sebastian barked his voice, regaining its usual command. We have guests for dinner. Set 2 extra places at the main table. Barnaby blinked. At the main table, sir, with Lady Genevieve and Lord Silas. Did I stutter? Sebastian's eyes flashed. And have Mrs. Higgins. No, she's too gossipy. Have you find something for Mrs. Caldwell to wear? Something from the West Wing closets. The blue silk, perhaps, or the emerald. Clara stood by the door, shivering, clutching Leo's hand so tight her knuckles were white. Your Grace, I cannot wear your late wife's. Not Alice's. Sebastian cut her off sharply. The pain in his eyes flickered raw and open for a split second before the walls went back up. My sister's. She left her wardrobe here before she moved to France. She was about your size. He turned to the butler. You have 20 minutes, Barnaby. Make them look like they belong. 20 minutes later, Clara looked in the mirror of the guest chamber and didn't recognize herself. The dress was a deep midnight blue velvet, high-necked, but fitted cascading down in heavy, expensive folds. It made her skin look like porcelain and brought out the striking blue of her eyes. Her hair, usually pulled back in a severe bun, had been softened by one of the younger maid's loose tendrils framing her face. She looked like a lady. She looked like the daughter of Arthur Caldwell, the man she used to be before the ruin. Mamma. Leo sat on the massive 4-poster bed, swinging his legs. He had been scrubbed clean, his unruly hair combed flat, wearing a miniature dinner jacket that had likely belonged to Sebastian when he was a boy. You look like a princess. Clara turned, fighting back tears. And you look like a prince, my love. But remember the rules. You must be quiet. You must eat with your mouth closed, and do not speak unless spoken to. Because of the bad lady, Leo asked. Because we are playing a game, Clara corrected, kneeling to button his jacket. A very serious game. If we win, we get £20. If we lose... She didn't finish. A knock came at the door. Barnaby appeared. They are seated, Mrs. Caldwell. The Duke is waiting. The dining room of Blackwood Hall was a cavernous space lit by a massive crystal chandelier that cast a cold diamond-hard light over the table. At one end sat Lord Silas Blackwood, a man of 50 with a complexion ruddy from too much port and eyes that were constantly calculating the value of the silverware. Beside him sat Lady Genevieve Sterling. She was undeniably beautiful with raven hair and sharp features, but her beauty was like a knife meant to cut. They were in the middle of complaining about the draught when the double doors opened. Sebastian entered first, looking more alive than he had in years. He wasn't slumped. His head was high, and on his arm was a woman in midnight blue. Silas dropped his fork. Genevieve narrowed her eyes, her lips thinning into a dangerous line. "Good evening," Sebastian said, his voice smooth. "I apologize for the delay. I was detained." He pulled out a chair for Clara. She sat, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. Leo scrambled into the chair next to her, looking tiny against the high-backed velvet seat. "Sebastian," Silas said, recovering first. He gestured with a greased hand. "We were not aware you were entertaining company." "An oversight," Sebastian replied, taking his place at the head of the table. "Silas, Genevieve, allow me to introduce Mrs. Clara Caldwell and her son Leo." Genevieve didn't bow. She stared at Clara with the intensity of a predator assessing weak prey. "Caldwell, I don't believe I know the family. Are you from the Dorset Caldwells?" Clara's throat went dry. She gripped the napkin in her lap. "No, Lady Genevieve. My family. Travelled." "Travelled?" Genevieve repeated the word, dripping with disdain. "How bohemian, and how exactly do you know the Duke Sebastian hasn't left this estate in 3 years?" This was the test. Sebastian hadn't given Clara a script. He wanted to see if she could swim. Clara looked at Sebastian. He was watching her, his face impassive, but his hand was clenched on the table. He needed her to be strong. Clara straightened her spine. She remembered her father's lessons before he lost everything. "You are a Caldwell. You bow to no one but the Queen." "We met in the library." Clara lied, the falsehood coming easier than she expected. "I have a great passion for rare manuscripts. The Duke was kind enough to consult with me regarding his collection." "A scholar," Silas scoffed, eyeing Clara's chest rather than her face. "A pretty thing like you." "I find intellect is not limited by gender, Lord Silas," Clara said coolly. Sebastian hid a smirk behind his wine glass. The soup was served. It was a tense affair. The only sound was the clinking of silver against china. Then disaster struck. Leo, trying to mimic the adults, reached for a roll. His elbow knocked over his heavy crystal goblet. Crash! Water flooded the pristine white tablecloth. The sound echoed like a gunshot in the silent room. Leo froze, his eyes filling with instant terror. He looked at Clara, then at the Duke, trembling. I'm sorry, don't hit me." The room went deadly silent. The phrase, "don't hit me," hung in the air, heavy and telling. Genevieve let out a cruel, high-pitched laugh. "Oh dear. It seems the scholar's child lacks breeding. Perhaps he would be more comfortable in the stables." Silas chuckled. "Indeed, children should be seen and not heard, and certainly not clumsy." Clara's face burned. She reached for a towel, her hands shaking. "Leo, it's all right." "Leave it," Sebastian's voice boomed. He stood up. The table rattled. He walked around the table, his heavy footsteps thudding on the carpet. He stopped behind Leo. The boy flinched, closing his eyes, expecting a blow. Sebastian took his own napkin. With surprising gentleness, he placed it over the puddle. Then he picked up his own goblet of water and deliberately tipped it over. Water spilled across the Duke's place setting, merging with Leo's puddle. "An accident," Sebastian said, looking straight at Genevieve. "The table was uneven. It seems I am clumsy as well." He looked down at Leo. "It is just water, Leo. It dries." Leo looked up, his hazel eyes wide with awe. You made a mess too." "We are a messy household," Sebastian declared. He put a hand on Leo's shoulder, a protective, claiming weight. "Anyone who has a problem with the way my guest eats is free to leave. The carriage can be ready in 5 minutes." Genevieve's face turned a blotchy red. Silas looked at his nephew with new eyes, calculating eyes. This was not the broken man they had come to manipulate. This was a man defending something. "No need for theatrics, Sebastian," Silas muttered, signaling the footman to clean up. "We simply worry about you. The deadline, you know. The codicil." "The codicil," Sebastian said, sitting back down, "requires me to be married or to have an heir." He paused, letting the silence stretch. "Perhaps I am working on it." He looked at Clara. For a moment it wasn't a performance. The gratitude in his eyes was real. Clara felt a flush that had nothing to do with the wine. She realized with a jolt that she wasn't just afraid of the Duke anymore. She was captivated by him. The dinner ended not with a bang, but with a simmering retreat. Genevieve pleaded a headache, likely brought on by her inability to humiliate Clara, and retired to the east wing. Silas followed, claiming he needed a cigar, though his gaze lingered suspiciously on Clara as he left. As the doors closed, the energy in the room collapsed. Clara slumped in her chair, the adrenaline fading, leaving her exhausted. "You did well," Sebastian said. He was standing by the fireplace, the flames casting dancing shadows across his scarred cheek. "He was terrified," Clara whispered, looking at Leo, who had fallen asleep with his head on the table, clutching a half-eaten bread roll. "He thought you were going to hurt him." "I saw," Sebastian said quietly. "Who taught him to fear spilled water, Mrs. Caldwell?" Clara stiffened. "The world is not kind to boys without fathers, Your Grace. We have lived in difficult places. Landlords are not known for their patience." Sebastian walked over to the sleeping boy. He hesitated, then bent down. "Allow me," he said. Before Clara could protest, the Duke of Ashbourne scooped the sleeping 5-year-old into his arms. Leo stirred, mumbling something about a squirrel, and rested his head against Sebastian's velvet lapel. It was a picture that shouldn't have existed. The beast holding the child. "You don't have to," Clara said, her voice thick with emotion. "He is heavy." Sebastian deflected, though he held the boy as if he were made of precious glass. "And the stairs are steep. Come." They walked up the grand staircase in silence. Sebastian carried Leo to the guest room, laying him gently on the bed. He watched as Clara removed the boy's shoes and tucked the duvet around him. "The storm has worsened," Sebastian said, standing in the doorway as Clara finished. "The roads are blocked. Barnaby says the carriage cannot make it to the village tonight." Clara stood up, panic flaring again. "But we cannot stay. The agreement was for dinner." "Do you want to walk 5 miles in a blizzard with a child?" Sebastian asked archly. "You will stay. The room is yours. Barnaby has placed your payment on the vanity. £20. Clara looked at the envelope. It was salvation. "Thank you, Your Grace. We will leave at first light. Good night, Mrs. Caldwell. Good night, Sebastian." She said his name before she could stop herself. He froze his hand on the doorknob. He didn't turn back, but he didn't correct her. He just closed the door. Sebastian didn't go to bed. He couldn't. His mind was racing, fueled by the strange warmth of the boy's weight in his arms and the defiance in Clara's blue eyes. He went to his study, the private sanctum where he kept the estate records. He poured himself a brandy, but he didn't drink it. Instead, he walked to the massive filing cabinets that lined the far wall. Caldwell. The name had been nagging him all night. Genevieve had asked if she was a Dorset Caldwell, and Clara had denied it. But there was something in her posture, something in the way she held her silverware that spoke of a life before poverty. He opened the drawer marked C, covering the years 1880, 1885. This was the era of his father, the 8th Duke, a man who had been a brilliant businessman, but a ruthless one. Sebastian thumbed through the dusty folders. Carrington, Carter. His fingers stopped on a thick file. Caldwell Arthur, Iron and Copper Holdings. Sebastian pulled it out, carrying it to the desk lamp. He opened the folder, the smell of old paper filling the air. It was a contract, a partnership agreement between the Blackwood estate and Arthur Caldwell for a mining operation in Cornwall. Sebastian scanned the documents. His eyes widened. According to the dates, the mine had struck a massive vein of copper in 1884. It should have made Arthur Caldwell a millionaire. But 3 months later, a second document was filed, a foreclosure notice. Reason for foreclosure. Breach of contract due to delayed shipment. It was a technicality, a loophole. Sebastian recognized the handwriting in the margins. It wasn't his father's. It was Silas's. Silas had been managing that sector of the estate then. He had engineered a delay, triggered the default clause, and seized Arthur Caldwell's shares for pennies on the pound. Sebastian flipped to the next page. A newspaper clipping was stapled to the back. Tragedy in Cornwall. Ruined industrialist Arthur Caldwell takes own life. Leaves behind wife and 18-year-old daughter, Clara. Sebastian felt the blood drain from his face. He sat back heavily in his leather chair. Clara wasn't just a stranger. She was the daughter of the man his family had destroyed, the man his uncle had cheated. "My God," Sebastian whispered. She was sleeping under his roof. She was washing dishes to survive while his family grew rich on the copper that should have been hers. Did she know she must? That was why she hesitated when he asked her name. That was why she looked at the luxury of Blackwood Hall with such guarded eyes. She wasn't just poor. She was a victim of the very name she was now pretending to marry into. A sudden noise from the hallway snapped him out of his reverence. It was the creak of floorboards. Heavy, clumsy footsteps. Not Clara. Not Leo. Sebastian stood up, blowing out the lamp. He moved to the door, opening it a crack. Down the hall in the dim gaslight, he saw a figure moving away from the guest wing. It was Silas, and he was holding something, a small, worn piece of fabric. It was the boy's coat. Silas stopped under a sconce, examining the inside collar of the coat. He pulled out a small, stitched label. Sebastian strained his ears. "Caldwell," Silas muttered to himself, a slow, predatory grin spreading across his face. "I knew I recognized those eyes." Silas didn't go back to his room. He turned and headed toward the library where the telephone was. Sebastian realized with a jolt of horror that the game had changed. Silas knew. And Silas wasn't going to just expose her as a fraud. He was going to use this. If the world found out the Duke was harboring the daughter of a man the Blackwoods legally ruined, the scandal wouldn't just be about a fake fiancé. It would be about the legitimacy of the Blackwood fortune itself. Or worse, Silas would try to finish what he started 10 years ago to ensure no claimants remained. Sebastian grabbed the file and shoved it into his jacket. He had to get to Clara before morning. He had to tell her he knew, and he had to decide whose side he was, on his family's legacy or the boy who told him not to cry. The hallway was silent, save for the howling wind battering the window panes. Sebastian stood outside Clara's door, his hand hovering over the wood. He held the file containing Arthur Caldwell's ruin against his chest like a shield. He didn't knock. He couldn't risk waking the boy or alerting Silas, who was prowling the house like a restless wolf. Sebastian turned the handle. It was unlocked. The room was bathed in the pale blue light of the snowstorm outside. Clara was not in bed. She was sitting in the window seat, wrapped in a shawl, staring out into the white abyss. She turned sharply as the door opened, her eyes wide with alarm. "Your Grace," she whispered, standing up quickly. "Is Leo?" "The boy is sleeping," Sebastian said, his voice low and rough. He closed the door behind him and locked it. The click of the lock made Clara flinch. "What is happening?" she asked, pulling the shawl tighter. "Why are you here?" Sebastian walked across the room. He didn't stop until he was standing in the moonlight, the scar on his face stark and jagged. He held out the file. "I know who you are," he said. Clara froze. The air left her lungs. She looked at the file, then at his face. There was no point in denying it. The way he looked at her, with a mixture of accusation and something else she couldn't place, told her the game was up. "I see," she said, her voice trembling, but her chin held high. "So the great Duke has discovered the intruder's secret. Are you going to call the constable, have me arrested for fraud?" "Look at it," Sebastian commanded, thrusting the file toward her. Clara hesitated, then took the folder. She opened it. Her eyes scanned the familiar name of her father, the mining contracts, and the foreclosure notice. "This," her voice broke. "This is the paper that killed him. My Uncle Silas drafted the breach of contract," Sebastian said, his voice devoid of emotion, though his hands were clenched at his sides. "He engineered the delay in the shipping lines. He ensured your father would default. He stole the copper mine. It built the east wing of this house." Clara looked up, tears of pure rage spilling over. "I know. I was 18. I watched them take the furniture. I watched my father wither away until he couldn't take it anymore. We were left with nothing. I scrubbed floors while your family bought thoroughbred horses with our money." She threw the file onto the floor. "So yes, Your Grace, I came into your garden. I ate your food. And I don't regret it. You owe me more than a dinner." She waited for the explosion. She waited for him to defend his name. Instead, Sebastian dropped to his knees. He didn't kneel in prayer. He knelt to pick up the scattered papers. He gathered them slowly, methodically. Then he remained on one knee, looking up at her. The position was submissive, shocking for a man of his station. "I did not know," Sebastian said quietly. "I was in the army then. When I came back, the money was just there. I never asked where it came from." "Ignorance is a luxury of the rich," Clara spat, though her anger was losing its heat in the face of his strange humility. "You are right," Sebastian admitted, "and an apology is insufficient. But I am offering one regardless. I am sorry, Clara." He stood up, towering over her again, but the threat was gone. "Silas knows, too," Sebastian warned. "I saw him with the boy's coat. He found the name tag. He is making a call, or he will as soon as the lines are repaired. He won't just expose you as a fraud to humiliate me. He will try to destroy you, to bury the evidence of his own crime. If you are discredited, if you are branded a thief or a con artist, no one will believe your claim to the mine." Clara's face went pale. "He would hurt Leo. He would destroy anyone to get the title," Sebastian said, "which is why we have to leave." "Leave?" Clara looked at the window. "It's a blizzard. Not leave the house," Sebastian corrected. "We have to leave the truth behind. If we are to survive Silas, we cannot be Clara the seamstress and Sebastian the recluse anymore." He stepped closer, invading her space, his scent of cedar and rain enveloping her. "Silas thinks he has me trapped. He thinks if he exposes you, I lose the codicil deadline and he gets the estate. But he is missing one thing." "What?" Clara breathed. "He thinks this is a lie," Sebastian said intensely. "He thinks I hired you. If we prove it is real, he has no power." "But it isn't real," Clara whispered. Sebastian reached out his gloved thumb, tracing the line of her jaw. His touch was electric. "Then we make it real. Not for love, for war. You marry me, Clara. Legally. Immediately. As my wife, you are untouchable. As the Duchess, the mine becomes ours, yours. And Silas gets nothing." Clara stared at him. It was the most unromantic proposal in history, born of vengeance and strategy. Yet looking into his tortured dark eyes, she felt a pull that terrified her. "You would marry a seamstress to spite your uncle. I would marry the daughter of Arthur Caldwell to balance the scales of justice," Sebastian corrected. He looked toward the bed where Leo slept. "And the boy needs a father who can protect him. I have failed one child, Clara. I will not fail another." The mention of his lost son hung in the air, a raw, open wound. Clara saw the grief he carried heavy as a stone. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay. I will do it," she said, her voice strengthening. "For Leo. And for my father." Sebastian nodded, stepping back, the mask of the Duke sliding back into place. "Good. Then get some sleep, my future Duchess. Tomorrow we go to war." Morning brought a silence so profound it felt like the world had ended. The blizzard had passed, leaving Blackwood Hall buried under 3 feet of pristine white snow. The roads were impassable. The telephone lines were down. They were cut off from England. In the breakfast room, the atmosphere was toxic. Silas sat at the head of the table. Sebastian's usual spot, buttering toast with aggressive cheerfulness. Lady Genevieve was sipping tea, looking bored and irritated by the isolation. When Sebastian walked in, followed by Clara and Leo, Silas didn't move. "Morning, nephew?" Silas smirked. "Sleep well, I imagine the guest wing is drafty. Poor insulation. Cheap materials." "The guest wing is fine," Sebastian said coldly, pulling out a chair for Clara. Leo climbed into his seat, clutching his wooden soldier. He looked at Silas warily. "You look like the bad king in my storybook." Silas's smile twitched. "And you, little urchin, look like you're wearing stolen clothes." "Silas," Sebastian warned, his voice a low rumble. "Oh, come now, Sebastian." Silas dropped the knife. "Let's stop the charade." I know who she is. Clara Caldwell, daughter of that incompetent fool Arthur. He looked at Genevieve. Did you know, my dear, our Sebastian is courting the help? A washerwoman, Genevieve gasped, looking at Clara with renewed disgust. Is this true? You brought a servant to our table. Clara's hands trembled in her lap, but she remembered the plan. War. She looked Silas dead in the eye. I am the daughter of the man you swindled, Lord Silas, and I am not the help. I am the fiancé of the Duke. Silas laughed a harsh, barking sound. Fiancé, please. It's a pathetic ruse to beat the will's deadline, and it won't work. As soon as the snow clears, I'm riding to the magistrate. Fraud, impersonation, perhaps even trespassing. By the time I'm done, you'll be in a workhouse and the boy will be in an orphanage. Leo whimpered. Clara stood up, knocking her chair back. You will not touch him. Sit down, Clara, Sebastian said calmly. Too calmly. He took a sip of coffee, ignoring his uncle's triumphant grin. You seem very confident, Uncle, but you are operating on old information. Oh, and what information is that? You assume I need to wait for a license or a priest from the village, Sebastian said. But you forget the privileges of the Ashbourne title. The chapel on the grounds is consecrated, and as the magistrate of this county, a title I hold not you, I can grant a special license. Sebastian stood up. Barnaby. The butler appeared instantly from the shadows, looking flushed with excitement. Your Grace, prepare the chapel, Sebastian ordered, and witness the signatures. We are getting married. Today. Silas's face went purple. You can't. It's insanity. You can't marry a pauper. Watch me, Sebastian said. The rest of the day was a blur of frantic activity within the snowbound house. The staff, sensing the shift in power and universally hating Silas, rallied around Clara. Maids who had ignored her yesterday were now altering the blue velvet dress stitching lace from the attic trunks to make it bridal. But the real transformation was happening in the library. Sebastian had taken Leo there to get him out of the way of the fussing maids. The boy stood in the center of the massive room, staring up at the thousands of books. Do you have a book about dragons? Leo asked. Sebastian looked down from the ladder where he was retrieving the family Bible. I believe so. Third shelf, section B. Leo ran over his small fingers, tracing the spines. He pulled out a large, leather-bound tome. He struggled to open it on the floor. Sebastian climbed down and sat on the rug beside him. Here. Like this. He opened the book to an illustration of St. George and the dragon. Leo's eyes went wide. Who is the man? Leo asked. A knight, Sebastian said. He fights monsters. Are you a knight? Sebastian touched his scar unconsciously. No. I have fought monsters, but I didn't win. That is why I have this. Leo looked at the scar, then at the picture. He leaned his head against Sebastian's arm. That's okay. Knights are lonely. That's why they need dragons. To keep them company. Sebastian felt a lump in his throat. The boy's logic was nonsensical and perfect. Leo, Sebastian said softly. I am going to marry your mother today. I know, Leo said, turning the page. Does that mean you're my papa now? Sebastian froze. The word papa hit him harder than the carriage crash. He looked at the boy, this small, fragile life that had wandered into his garden and demanded to be loved. It means, Sebastian said, his voice thick, that no one will ever take your toy soldier again, and no one will ever make you afraid of spilled water. Leo smiled, a bright, toothy thing. Good, because I spilled some juice on the rug over there. Sebastian let out a laugh, a real rusty, jagged laugh that surprised them both. The ceremony took place at sunset in the private chapel. It was freezing, the stone walls radiating the winter chill, but the candles Barnaby had lit cast a warm golden glow. There was no music, no guests other than a fuming Silas and a stunned Genevieve who had been forced to attend as witnesses to ensure the legality couldn't be challenged later. Clara walked down the short aisle. She wore the blue velvet dress now adorned with white lace cuffs and a collar. She held a bouquet of dried winter flowers from the conservatory. She looked regal, not like a seamstress, like a queen walking to her coronation. When she reached the altar, Sebastian was waiting. He wore his formal dress blacks, his medals from the war pinned to his chest. He looked dangerous and beautiful. The vicar, an old man who lived in the gatehouse and had braved the snow on foot, performed the rites. "Do you, Sebastian Arthur Blackwood, take this woman?" "I do," Sebastian said, his voice echoing off the stone. He looked at Clara, and for the first time, he let the mask drop completely. He let her see the fear, the hope, and the desperate need for redemption. "Do you, Clara Caldwell?" Clara looked at Silas lurking in the shadows like a demon. Then she looked at Leo, sitting in the front pew, swinging his legs and holding his dragon book. Finally, she looked at Sebastian. "I do," she said clearly. "Then by the power vested in me." The doors of the chapel burst open with a violent bang. A gust of wind and snow swirled into the church, extinguishing half the candles. Standing in the doorway was not a guest. It was a man in a heavy constable's coat, flanked by two others. They were covered in snow, looking like they had trekked through hell. "Stop the ceremony!" the lead man shouted, breathless. Silas stepped forward, a triumphant, wicked grin splitting his face. "Finally, I thought the storm would stop you." Sebastian turned, shielding Clara with his body. "What is the meaning of this? You are trespassing." The constable stepped forward, shaking snow from his hat. "My apologies, Your Grace, but we received an urgent message via the rider this morning from Lord Silas Blackwood." He pointed a gloved finger at Clara. "We are here to arrest that woman for the theft of the Ashbourne diamond." Clara gasped. "The what? Don't play the innocent," Silas shouted, pulling a small velvet pouch from his pocket. "I found this in her room, in her sewing bag." He tossed the pouch to the constable. The officer opened it, revealing a massive, glittering diamond brooch, an heirloom that had belonged to Sebastian's mother. "It was missing from the safe." Silas lied smoothly. "I saw her take it." Sebastian stepped forward, his eyes burning with black fire. "That is a lie. She has not been near the safe." "Can you prove it?" Silas challenged. "She is a pauper, Sebastian. A desperate woman. Desperate women steal. Arrest her." The constable looked at Sebastian, then at Clara. "I'm sorry, Your Grace, but with the evidence, we must take her in for questioning." Clara grabbed Sebastian's arm. "Sebastian, I swear." "I know," Sebastian said. He looked at the constable. "You have no jurisdiction here." "I have the jurisdiction of the Crown, sir." "Theft is theft." The constable moved to grab Clara. "No!" The scream didn't come from Clara. It came from the front pew. Leo jumped up, dropping his book. He ran at the constable, flailing his small fists, hitting the man's legs. "Leave my mama alone, you bad man! Leave her alone! Get the brat off me!" The constable grunted, shoving Leo aside. Leo fell back, hitting his head against the wooden pew with a sickening thud. The boy cried out once, then went silent. The world stopped. Clara screamed, "Leo!" But Sebastian moved faster than sound. The sight of the boy falling just like his son had fallen in the carriage, snapped something deep inside the Duke's soul. The ice didn't just crack, it exploded. He crossed the distance in one stride. He grabbed the constable by the throat and lifted him off the ground, slamming him against the stone wall. "If you touch him again," Sebastian snarled his voice, a demonic growl that shook the stained glass. "I will kill you where you stand. I don't care about the crown. I am the Duke of Ashbourne, and you are hurting my son." "He's breathing." Clara's sob pierced the red haze of Sebastian's rage. "Sebastian, don't kill him. Don't let Silas win." Sebastian froze. With a guttural roar, he hurled the constable aside rather than snapping his neck. He turned to Silas, who was shaking the velvet pouch triumphantly. "She stole the Ashbourne diamond. Arrest her." "That is impossible," Sebastian said, his voice deadly calm. "Because I sold the Ashbourne diamond 3 years ago to pay off your gambling debts, uncle." Silas went pale. "What? That stone is paste, worth 5 shillings, Sebastian revealed, tossing the Arthur Caldwell file to the coughing constable. "But this file proves my uncle forged documents to steal the Copperhead mine from this woman's father. I suggest you arrest the real thief." The constable looked at the file, then at the sputtering Silas. "Lord Blackwood, you're coming with us." As Silas was dragged out into the snow, screaming, a small voice broke the silence. "Mama!" Leo sat up, rubbing his head. Sebastian dropped to his knees, pulling the boy into his arms. "I've got you, Leo. The dragon is gone." "Did the knight win?" Leo whispered. "Yes." Sebastian choked out tears, finally spilling. "He won." They didn't return to the altar. Kneeling on the cold stone floor, holding their son between them, Sebastian and Clara finished their vows. When he kissed her, it wasn't a contract. It was a promise kept. Months later, the garden was no longer silent. The frozen Duke sat on the bench, watching his wife and son chase butterflies among the blooming roses. He touched the cheap handkerchief still tucked in his pocket. The ice had melted, and for the first time in a lifetime, the Duke of Ashbourne was warm. And that is how a lonely duke, a brave seamstress, and a little boy proved that family is about who you fight for. Sebastian thought his life was over, but it took a child to restart his heart. If you loved seeing the villain get what he deserved, please like this video. It helps the channel growing. Do you think Sebastian was right to keep the fake diamond a secret? Let me know in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell for more stories. Thanks for watching.